when a silent stranger rode into the dusty town with secrets in his storm-cloud eyes. Everyone whispered warnings, except her. Behind his guarded heart lay a painful past that could destroy everything. But sometimes the most dangerous thing isn't falling for a mysterious man. It's discovering he might be worth the risk. Will their forbidden connection survive when his dark history finally catches up? Hit that like button if you love stories of mysterious romance. Subscribe for more captivating tales and drop a comment below letting us know where in the world you're listening from. Now, let's begin this unforgettable journey. The stranger arrived with the dust storm, as if the desert had breathed him into existence. Clara watched from behind the cracked window of her father's general store, her fingers pressed against glass warm with afternoon heat. The man's silhouette, cut sharp against the amber sky, his horse moving with deliberate slowness down the town's singular street. She had seen many travelers pass through Millbrook, prospectors chasing fool's gold, merchants peddling dreams, drifters running from ghosts they couldn't name. But something about this one made her heart stutter in her chest, like a bird against cage bars. Perhaps it was the way he held himself, straight-backed yet weary, or how the wind seemed to part around him rather than push through. Clara's breath fogged the window, obscuring her view. When she wiped it clear, the stranger had stopped directly across from the store. His hat cast shadows across features she couldn't quite discern, but she felt his gaze find hers through the glass. For a moment that stretched like eternity, neither moved. Then he touched his hat brim, in acknowledgement so slight she might have imagined it. The gesture sent warmth cascading through her, unexpected as summer rain. She stepped back from the window, suddenly aware of how intently she'd been watching. Outside, the stranger dismounted and tied his horse to the post, with movements economical as prayer. Clara smoothed her apron and waited, though for what, she couldn't say. The bell above the door chimed his entry like a church announcing something sacred. Clara looked up from the inventory ledger she'd been pretending to study, and there he stood, tall, lean, with eyes the color of storm clouds before lightning. Time seemed to slow as those eyes met hers, and in that suspended moment, she felt something fundamental shift inside her chest, like tectonic plates, finding new alignment. "Afternoon," his voice came low, roughened by travel and careful disuse. "Good afternoon," Clara replied, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Can I help you with something?" He stepped deeper into the store, his boots making no sound on the worn wooden floor. Clara noted how he moved, like water finding its course, unhurried but purposeful. His eyes swept the shelves lined with goods, sacks of flour, bolts of fabric, jars of preserves catching dusty sunlight. Yet she sensed he catalogued more than merchandise. He mapped exits, assessed corners, read the space like a book written in the language of survival. "Supplies," he said finally, "for the road." Clara nodded and moved to gather the usual traveling provisions: dried meat, hardtack, coffee beans. As she worked, she felt his gaze following her movements, not intrusive, but attentive, as if memorizing the rhythm of her hands. The silence between them felt dense with unspoken questions, comfortable yet charged with possibility. When she turned back, she found him examining a small collection of handmade pottery on the corner shelf. Her own work, pieces she'd shaped, in private moments when the weight of sameness pressed too heavily upon her shoulders. His fingers hovered over a small ceramic bird, its wings spread as if caught mid-flight. "Did you make this?" he asked, and something in his voice made her look up sharply. Beneath the casual question lay recognition, as if he understood the yearning embedded in clay wings. "Yes," she admitted, heat rising in her cheeks. No one in town paid attention to her pottery. Functional things, useful things held currency here. Beauty was luxury they couldn't afford. He picked up the bird with careful reverence, cradling it in palms that bore old scars like stories written in flesh. "She's trying to fly away," he observed quietly. Clara's chest tightened. Or she's just landed somewhere new. Their eyes met across the counter, and in that exchange, Clara felt something crack open inside her, not breaking but blooming, like seeds finally finding the right soil. The stranger, Samuel, he'd finally offered when her father had pressed for a name, began taking his meals at Widow Morrison's boarding house 3 doors down from the store. Clara learned this not through conversation, but through observation, watching him cross the street each evening as shadows grew long and the town settled into its quiet rhythm of sameness. He never lingered in the store longer than necessary for his purchases, yet Clara began to anticipate his visits with an expectation that surprised her. She found herself arranging displays more carefully, ensuring the coffee beans were fresh, the apples polished, small preparations that felt like prayers to an uncertain God. On the 4th day, he bought the ceramic bird. He said nothing about his intention, simply placed it among his other purchases: flour, soap, ammunition for a rifle he carried, but kept carefully out of sight. Clara wrapped it in brown paper with extra care, her hands trembling slightly as she creased the edges. "Be careful with her," she said softly, not looking up from her careful folding. When she glanced up, she found him watching her with an expression she couldn't name, something between gratitude and sadness, recognition and loss. He took the package and nodded, a gesture that seemed to carry more weight than any words, and could bear. That evening, Clara saw him sitting on the boarding house porch, the ceramic bird on the railing beside him, unwrapped and catching the last rays of sunset. He sat motionless for nearly an hour, staring out at the desert beyond town, as if waiting for something to emerge from the heat shimmer. The bird faced the same direction, its clay wings spread toward the horizon. Clara watched from her bedroom window, curtains drawn except for a narrow gap. Something about the scene, man and ceramic bird keeping vigil together, made her throat tight with unnamed emotion. She recognized in his stillness her own restlessness, in his patient, watching her own desperate hoping for something beyond the confines of Millbrook's dust-straight streets. When full darkness fell and Samuel finally rose to go inside, Clara noticed he left the bird on the railing, a strange gesture that spoke of trust, of claiming space in a world that belonged to others. She fell asleep, wondering if the bird was keeping watch, and if so, for what. "There's something not right about that man," Mrs. Patterson announced during the weekly town meeting, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd appointed herself guardian of Millbrook's moral compass. "A decent man would have moved on by now. What's he hanging around for?" Clara sat in the back row, ostensibly mending a torn apron, but actually listening to the murmur of suspicion that had begun circulating like smoke through the town. Samuel had been in Millbrook for 2 weeks, longer than most travelers stayed, and his presence had begun to generate the kind of nervous energy that builds before thunderstorms. "I've seen him watching the bank," offered Jim Crawford, the barber, studying it like he's planning something. "And he never joins the other." "Men for cards or drinks," added Tom Morrison, the widow's son. "What kind of man keeps so much to himself?" Clara's hands stilled on her sewing. She wanted to speak up, to defend Samuel's right to solitude, but words felt dangerous here. Anything she said would be examined, dissected, used as evidence of some imagined complicity. Instead, she bit her tongue and let the speculation swirl around her like dust devils. Her father cleared his throat from his position near the front. "Man pays for what he buys, causes no trouble. Seems to me that's all we can ask of anyone passing through." "But that's just it," Mrs. Patterson persisted. "He's not passing through, is he? He's settling in, making himself comfortable. What does he want here?" Clara thought of Samuel sitting on the boarding house porch each evening, the ceramic bird beside him like a talisman. She thought of his careful movements, his economical words, the way he handled her pottery as if it was spun from moonlight. What did he want? The same thing she wanted, perhaps. A place to stop running, a moment of peace in a world that offered precious little of either. The meeting concluded with no decisions made, only suspicions aired and fears given voice. As neighbors filed out into the night, Clara remained seated, her sewing forgotten in her lap. Through the window, she could see the boarding house porch, empty now, but somehow still holding the echo of Samuel's presence. Tomorrow, she decided, she would do something brave. The next morning, Clara arrived at the store early, before her father, before the sun had fully claimed the sky. She spent an hour in the back room with clay and water, her hands working memory into form. When she finished, she had created another bird, this one smaller, more delicate, its wings folded as if at rest rather than straining for flight. Samuel arrived for supplies just after noon, as had become his custom. Clara served him silently, adding the new ceramic bird to his usual order without comment or explanation. He noticed immediately, his storm cloud eyes moving from the package to her face. "Another bird," he observed. "She was lonely," Clara replied, surprising herself with the admission. Samuel paid for his purchases, but instead of leaving immediately, he lingered by the counter. Clara pretended to organize receipts, while he seemed to weigh words in his mind like coins, testing their value before spending them. "Why do you make them?" he asked finally. Clara looked up, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since that first day. "Because they remember how to leave." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite a smile, but a softening around the edges, like ice beginning to thaw. "And you?" "I'm still learning," she admitted. He nodded, as if her answer made perfect sense, as if he too were a student in the art of departure. "The wanting gets easier," he said quietly. "The leaving, that's something else entirely." That evening, Clara watched from her window as Samuel unwrapped the second bird on the porch. He placed it beside the first, adjusting their positions, until they seemed to be regarding each other across the wooden railing. Then he sat between them, a guardian to their small congregation, and watched the desert swallow the sun. Clara pressed her palm against the window glass, feeling the warmth of day surrendering to the coolness of night. For the first time in her 23 years, she felt truly seen, understood by someone whose understanding hadn't required explanations or justifications. It was a feeling both thrilling and terrifying, like standing at the edge of a cliff and discovering she might have wings after all. "You're different from the others," Samuel said. They stood on opposite sides of the store counter, the usual array of supplies between them. But today felt different, charged with possibility, heavy with the weight of almost spoken truths. Clara had been waiting for his visit, had rehearsed conversations that now seemed foolish in the face of his simple directness. "Different how?" she asked, her hands busy with unnecessary tasks, straightening already straight items, dusting surfaces that needed no dusting. "You see things," he replied. "Really see them, not just what's expected to be there." Clara paused in her pretend work, struck by the accuracy of his observation. In a town where conformity was survival and asking questions was dangerous, she had indeed learned to see beyond surfaces, to read the stories hidden in shadows and silences. "Sometimes I think seeing too much is a kind of curse," she admitted. Samuel was quiet for a moment, considering this. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of personal knowledge. "Better a curse you choose than a blessing that chooses you. Is that what brought you here? Running from a blessing?" The question slipped out before Clara could stop it. Too direct, too bold for the careful dance they'd been performing. She expected him to retreat behind his usual silence, but instead he surprised her. "Running from the weight of other people's expectations," he said, "from being what they needed me to be instead of what I was." Clara felt her heart quicken. Here was the first real glimpse behind the careful wall he maintained, the first evidence that Samuel carried his own collection of wounds and longings. "And what are you?" she asked softly. He looked at her for a long moment, his storm-cloud eyes searching her face as if trying to decide how much truth she could bear. "Still figuring that out," he said finally. "But I know what I'm not. I'm not a man who stays where he's not wanted." "Who says you're not wanted?" The words were out before Clara could consider their implications, bold and revealing as a confession. Samuel's expression shifted, something warming behind the careful guardedness. "Maybe I'm learning to ask different questions," he said quietly. That night, Clara found herself standing at her bedroom window longer than usual, watching the boarding house porch where two ceramic birds kept their vigil. For the first time, she imagined what it might be like to sit beside them, to share the watching and the waiting with someone who understood the ache of horizons. Clara discovered Samuel's secret by accident, in the way most important revelations unfold, not through seeking but through stumbling. She'd been walking home from evening prayers, taking the long way past the boarding house out of habit that had nothing to do with prayer and everything to do with hope of glimpsing a familiar silhouette on the porch. The sound reached her first, low, mournful, achingly beautiful. Music, but not played on any instrument she recognized. It seemed to emerge from the air itself, wavering and ethereal as desert wind through canyon stones. Clara followed the sound around the side of the boarding house, where lamplight spilled from an upstairs window. Through the gap in curtains, she saw Samuel seated on his bed, holding what looked like a wooden flute. His eyes were closed, his entire being focused on the melody that poured from the instrument like liquid moonlight. The music spoke of longing and loss, of journeys taken and left behind, of searching for something that might not exist but could not be abandoned. Clara pressed herself against the wall, hidden in shadow, guilt warring with fascination. She was intruding on something private, sacred even, yet she couldn't tear herself away. The music wound around her heart like silk thread, drawing tight until she could barely breathe. Then the song stopped. Samuel's eyes opened, and through the window, their gazes met. Clara's face burned with embarrassment, but she found herself unable to move, pinned by the intensity of his stare. For a moment that felt eternal, they regarded each other across the distance between ground and window, between public and private spaces. Samuel set down the flute carefully, never breaking eye contact. He crossed to the window and pushed it open wider. "I'm sorry," Clara whispered. "I didn't mean to." "Don't apologize for listening," he said quietly. "Music is meant to be heard." "It was beautiful," she told him, meaning more than just the melody. "My grandmother taught me," Samuel said, resting his forearms on the windowsill, "said the flute could speak things words couldn't carry." Clara nodded, understanding completely. "Like clay," she said. "Sometimes my hands know things my mind hasn't figured out yet." In the lamplight, Samuel's face appeared younger, less guarded. "Would you like to hear another song?" Clara glanced around the empty street, acutely aware of the impropriety of standing beneath a man's window in the darkness. But propriety seemed like a small price for this moment of connection, this glimpse into the hidden depths of Samuel's heart. "Yes," she whispered. He disappeared from the window briefly, then returned with his flute. This song was different, gentler, tinged with hope rather than sorrow. It spoke of coming home to places that had never been home, of finding unexpected gifts in unexpected places. As the melody washed over her, Clara felt something shift inside her chest, a door opening that she hadn't even realized was closed. When the last note faded into the desert night, they remained in comfortable silence. No words were needed. The music had said everything that mattered. The next morning brought unexpected courage. Clara found herself taking unusual care with her appearance, braiding wildflowers into her hair, choosing her best dress, pinching color into her cheeks. When Samuel arrived for his daily supplies, she was ready. "I was wondering," she began, then stopped, gathering her nerve like scattered coins. "Would you like to see where I make the birds?" Samuel paused in his examination of available goods, his attention shifting entirely to her. "You have a workshop?" "Of sorts," Clara admitted. "Behind the store. My father built it when I was 16. Said I needed somewhere for my peculiar interests." The slight smile that curved Samuel's lips transformed his entire face. "I'd like that very much." Clara's heart skipped as she led him through the store's back door and across the small courtyard to the adobe shed she'd claimed as her own. Inside, shelves lined the walls, filled with clay pieces in various stages of completion. Bowls, cups, and yes, more birds. Dozens of them, representing years of dreaming and yearning. "My word," Samuel breathed, moving deeper into the space with reverent steps. "This is extraordinary." Clara watched him examine her work, noting how he held each piece with the same careful reverence he'd shown the first bird. His appreciation felt different from the polite comments she occasionally received from townspeople. This was recognition, understanding, the meeting of one artist with another. "You see it too," she said. Not a question, but a statement. "The longing?" Samuel set down a small owl, its ceramic eyes wide with eternal watchfulness. "It's in every piece. The need to fly, to soar, to escape." He paused, looking directly at her. "Why haven't you?" "Escaped?" Clara laughed, but it sounded hollow even to her own ears. "And go where? Do what? I'm not like you. I can't just disappear into the desert with nothing but a horse and a flute." "Can't you?" Samuel's voice was gentle, without judgment. "Or have you just convinced yourself you can't?" The question hung between them like smoke, impossible to ignore. Clara had indeed convinced herself of many limitations, built cages from duty and fear and other people's expectations. But standing here in her workshop with Samuel, surrounded by the evidence of her own quiet rebellion, those limitations seemed suddenly flimsy as paper. "I've been planning it for so long, I think I forgot it was supposed to be temporary," she admitted quietly. Samuel nodded as if this made perfect sense. "Sometimes we need someone else to remind us we're already brave." He picked up a piece she'd forgotten, a bowl decorated with birds in flight, their wings carrying them beyond the rim's horizon. "May I buy this?" Clara's throat tightened. "You don't have to." "I want to," he said simply. "I want something beautiful that was made by someone who understands." As Clara wrapped the bowl, their fingers brushed, sending warmth spiraling through her. For the first time, she allowed herself to wonder what it might mean to be understood by someone like Samuel, to have her dreams recognized and valued. "Clara," Samuel said, as she handed him the package, "would you have dinner with me tonight? At the boarding house?" The invitation hung in the air like a challenge, like a promise, like the first real step towards something neither of them had yet named. Clara felt the weight of the town's watchful eyes, the expectations that bound her, the safety of the known. Then she looked at Samuel's face, open and hopeful, and made her choice. "Yes," she said, "I'd like that very much." Word of Clara's dinner with Samuel spread through Millbrook like wildfire through dry grass. By the next morning, it seemed every resident had an opinion about the impropriety of a respectable merchant's daughter dining alone with a mysterious stranger. "I'm just saying it doesn't look right," Mrs. Patterson announced loudly within. Clara's hearing as she swept the sidewalk in front of the mercantile. A young woman of good reputation shouldn't be seen keeping company with a man of questionable character. Clara's jaw tightened, but she continued arranging the window display with steady hands. The dinner had been lovely. Quiet conversation over Mrs. Morrison's roast chicken, Samuel sharing stories of distant places while carefully avoiding details of his past. Nothing improper had occurred, yet the town buzzed with scandal as if Clara had committed some great sin. Her father emerged. From the back room, his face weathered from years of dealing with difficult customers and difficult circumstances. "Clara, we need to talk." In the store's back office, surrounded by ledgers and inventory lists, her father's concern took on weight and gravity. "The Patterson woman paid me a visit this morning," he began carefully. "She's got some of the other families stirred up about you, associating with the stranger." "His name is Samuel," Clara said firmly, "and I'm 23 years old, Father. Surely I can choose my own dinner companions." "Normally, yes," her father agreed. "But these aren't normal circumstances. We depend on this community's goodwill, the store, our livelihood. It all relies on reputation. If enough people decide we're harboring improper influences—" He didn't need to finish. Clara understood the economics of small-town life, the delicate balance between acceptance and ostracism. One wrong step, one broken expectation, and a family could find themselves isolated, their business failing, their future crumbling. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Clara's voice stayed level despite the turmoil building in her chest. "Just be careful," her father said softly. "About appearances, about how much time you spend with him. People are starting to talk, and once that starts—" Clara nodded, though something rebellious was growing inside her, fed by the recognition she'd found in Samuel's eyes and the music she'd heard drifting from his window. Why should her happiness be subject to the approval of people who saw only surfaces, who feared anything that didn't fit their narrow view of propriety? That afternoon, when Samuel came for supplies, Clara served him with professional coolness, aware of Mrs. Patterson's watchful presence across the street. But when their hands brushed during the exchange of coins, she felt the same electric connection, the same sense of recognition that transcended the boundaries others tried to impose. "Clara," Samuel said quietly, "if my presence here is causing you difficulty—" "Don't," she interrupted, meeting his gaze directly. "Don't let their fear make you afraid too." Something flickered in his storm cloud eyes. Surprise, admiration, perhaps even the beginning of hope. In that moment, Clara realized she'd crossed a line she hadn't even known existed. There would be no going back to the safety of careful distance, to the comfort of unexamined dreams. The choice was made. Now she would have to live with the consequences. The letter arrived on a Tuesday, carried by a rider whose horse was lathered with sweat from hard traveling. Clara was arranging inventory when the stranger dismounted, tied his horse, and entered the store with the purposeful stride of someone bearing important business. "Looking for a man named of Samuel McCready," he announced. "Tall fellow, dark hair, carries a wooden flute. Someone said he might be taking supplies here." Clara's heart clenched. The formal tone, the official manner. This was authority come calling, the past finally catching up to the present. She glanced toward the back room, where Samuel was helping her father move heavy sacks of flour, their voices carrying the easy camaraderie that had developed between them over recent weeks. "May I ask your business with him?" Clara managed, her voice steadier than she felt. The rider studied her with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Official correspondence from the Territorial Marshal's office." Before Clara could respond, Samuel appeared from the back room, his expression carefully neutral. But she saw recognition in his eyes, the subtle tensing of shoulders as he prepared for whatever blow was coming. "I'm Samuel McCready," he said, quietly. The rider handed him a sealed envelope, then tipped his hat and left without another word. Samuel stood motionless, staring at the letter as if it contained poison rather than ink and paper. "Samuel?" Clara's father approached, concern evident in his voice. "Is everything all right?" "I need to read this alone," Samuel said, his voice distant. He looked at Clara with an expression she couldn't decipher. I'll return shortly." He left the store with measured steps, but Clara saw the tension in his stride, the way he held the letter like something that might explode. She wanted to follow, to offer comfort or support, but the gravity of his manner held her back. An hour passed. Then 2. Clara found herself checking the street repeatedly, her anxiety growing with each empty glance. When Samuel finally returned, his face was pale, his storm-cloud eyes haunted by whatever truths the letter had revealed. "I need to tell you something," he said without preamble. "Both of you. About why I came here, and why I might have to leave." Clara's father closed the store's ledger and sat down heavily. "Go on." Samuel took a deep breath, gathering words like a man preparing to carry impossible weight. "I was a deputy marshal in Silver Falls, worked under a man named Thompson, respected him like a father, until I discovered he was using his position to cover for cattle thieves, taking bribes to look the other way." Clara felt her world shift, pieces of Samuel's mystery falling into place like tumbleweeds settling after wind. "When I tried to report it, Thompson claimed I was the one taking bribes. My word against his, and he had friends, powerful friends." Samuel's hands clenched at his sides. "The letter, they've dropped the charges. Seems Thompson finally got caught by someone he couldn't buy off. They want me to come back, take my badge again." "But that's wonderful news," Clara's father said. "Your name cleared. Your reputation restored." "Is it?" Samuel looked directly at Clara. "What if I don't want to go back? What if I've found something here worth staying for?" The question hung in the air like morning mist, delicate and transformative. Clara felt her heart hammering against her ribs, felt the weight of possibility and fear battling in her chest. "What are you saying?" she whispered. "I'm saying I've learned the difference between running from something and running toward it," Samuel replied. "And for the first time in my life, I know which one I want to do." That evening, Clara found herself walking the desert beyond town's edge, needing space to think, to breathe, to understand the magnitude of what had been offered. Samuel's words echoed in her mind. "I found something here worth staying for." The implication was clear, terrifying, wonderful. She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice the approaching riders until they were nearly upon her. 3 men on horseback, their faces hard with purpose. Clara's blood chilled as she recognized the leader. Thompson, the corrupt marshal from Samuel's story, his star glinting like a threat in the fading light. "Miss," he called out with false courtesy, "you wouldn't happen to know where we might find Samuel Macready, would you?" Clara's mouth went dry. These weren't lawmen come to offer redemption. They were predators tracking prey. The letter had been a trap, a way to confirm Samuel's location. "I don't know anyone by that name," she lied, proud of how steady her voice remained. Thompson smiled without warmth. "Now, that's curious, because we heard tell he's been keeping company with a certain storekeeper's daughter. Wouldn't want anything unpleasant to happen to such a pretty young lady over a misunderstanding." Fear spiked through Clara, but with it came something else. Anger, protective fury at these men who would threaten her, who had driven Samuel from his home, with false accusations and corruption. "If you have business in our town, I suggest you conduct it through proper channels," she said firmly. "Sheriff Walsh doesn't take kindly to strangers making threats." Thompson's expression darkened. "Girl, you don't understand what you're dealing with." "MacReady's a dangerous man. He killed 3 innocent folks in Silver Falls before running like the coward he is." "That's a lie," Clara snapped before she could stop herself. "Is it?" Thompson's horse stepped closer. "He's filled your head with romantic notions, hasn't he? Made himself out to be the wronged hero. Trust me, miss, men like him leave nothing but destruction in their wake." Clara backed away, her mind racing. She needed to warn Samuel, but how could she escape 3 mounted men? Then she remembered the old mine shaft, hidden in the rocks behind her, a passage she'd explored as a child that led back toward town through underground tunnels. "You're wasting your time," she told Thompson. "He left days ago, headed toward the railroad." Thompson studied her face for deception. Whatever he saw there must have convinced him, because he reined his horse around. "If that's true, you've done yourself a favor," he said. "But if we find out you're lying—" He left the threat hanging as he spurred his horse toward town. Clara waited until the riders disappeared, then ran for the mine shaft. She had to reach Samuel before Thompson did. Had to warn him that his past had come calling with guns and false accusations, and the kind of justice that had nothing to do with truth. Clara burst into the boarding house just as Samuel was descending the stairs, his travel pack slung over his shoulder. His eyes widened at the sight of her disheveled appearance, the fear written plainly across her face. "Thompson's here," she gasped. "With men. They're coming for you." Samuel's face went hard, but not with surprise. "I know. Mrs. Morrison warned me, saw them asking questions at the saloon. That's why I'm leaving." "No," Clara said fiercely. "You can't run. Not again." "Clara, these men won't hesitate to hurt innocent people to get to me. I won't have your safety on my conscience." Samuel moved toward the door, but Clara stepped into his path. "And I won't have your cowardice on mine," she said, the words raw with emotion. "You told me the difference between running from something and running toward it. What are you doing now?" Samuel stopped, his storm-cloud eyes searching her face. "I'm protecting you." "By leaving me?" Clara's voice cracked. "By proving that everything Thompson said about you running away is true? What would you have me do? Face 3 armed men with nothing but righteousness as armor?" "Face them with truth," Clara said simply, "and with people who believe in that truth standing beside you." Before Samuel could respond, the boarding house door opened. Clara's father entered, followed by Sheriff Walsh, Doc Henderson, and to Clara's amazement, nearly a dozen other townspeople, all carrying weapons, all wearing expressions of grim determination. "About time we settled this," Sheriff Walsh announced. "Heard these strangers making accusations against a man who's been nothing but honest in his dealings here. Don't sit right with me." "Nor me," added Clara's father. "Samuel MacReady's proven his character through his actions. Rather trust him than some badge-wearing strangers making threats." Samuel stared at the assembled group, disbelief and something deeper, gratitude, hope, warring in his expression. "You don't understand what you're risking." "We understand plenty," Mrs. Morrison interrupted, surprising everyone. "Understand a good man when we see one. Understand the difference between law and justice. And right now, justice means standing with you." Clara felt tears prick her eyes as Samuel's careful composure cracked. Here was the support he'd never expected, the community he'd thought lost to him forever. People who chose to believe in him not because they had to, but because they wanted to. "They'll be at the jail by now," Sheriff Walsh continued, "demanding I turn you over. But last I checked, my jurisdiction trumps theirs until they can produce proper paperwork. And something tells me their paperwork won't bear close examination." Samuel looked at Clara, his eyes asking questions words couldn't frame. She stepped closer, taking his hand in hers with a boldness that would have shocked her days ago. "Stay," she said simply. "Choose to stay." The confrontation came at sunset, when shadows grew long and the air hummed with tension thick as storm clouds. Thompson and his men had indeed gone to the jail, demanding Sheriff Walsh hand over Samuel for transport back to Silver Falls. When Walsh requested documentation of charges, Thompson had grown belligerent, threatening federal intervention. Now, they faced each other in the street outside the jail. 3 corrupt lawmen against a sheriff, a dozen townspeople, and one man who'd found the courage to stop running. Clara stood slightly behind Samuel, her presence both anchor and reason to fight. "This doesn't concern you people," Thompson called out, his hand resting prominently on his gun butt. "McCready's a wanted criminal. Turn him over and nobody gets hurt." "Funny thing about wanted criminals," Sheriff Walsh replied, his own gun clearly visible. "They usually come with proper warrants. All you've shown me is a letter full of accusations and no legal standing whatsoever." Thompson's face reddened. "I have authority." "You have jurisdiction in Silver Falls," Walsh interrupted. "Last I checked, this ain't Silver Falls. You want McCready, you'll need legitimate paperwork from the territorial judge. Until then, he's under my protection." The standoff stretched like a held breath. Clara felt Samuel's tension, his instinct to surrender himself rather than endanger others, warring with his newfound determination to fight back. She squeezed his hand, reminding him he wasn't alone. Then Doc Henderson stepped forward, papers in his weathered hand. "Might interest you to know I sent some telegrams after you boys rode into town, making noise. Got interesting responses from Silver Falls. Seems you, Thompson, are the one facing charges now. Corruption, bribery, falsifying evidence. There's a real marshal coming to collect you." Thompson's composure cracked, revealing the desperate fury beneath. "You're all making a mistake. McCready's dangerous. The only dangerous thing here," Samuel said quietly, speaking for the first time, "is letting corrupt men hide behind badges while good people suffer for their crimes." He stepped forward, past the protective line of townspeople, facing his accusers directly. Clara's heart hammered as she watched him choose courage over safety, truth over silence. "I was a deputy marshal who tried to do the right thing," Samuel continued, his voice carrying across the street. "I reported corruption and was made the scapegoat for it. I've spent months running, hiding, letting shame convince me I was the guilty one. But I'm done running. If you want me, Thompson, here I am." The challenge hung in the air like a blade. Thompson's hand moved toward his gun, but before he could clear leather, Sheriff Walsh's revolver was in his hand, aimed steady. "And sure, I wouldn't," Walsh said calmly. "See, that telegram also brought news that you boys killed a sheriff in Tucson last week. Makes you murderers as well as thieves. And in my experience, murderers don't get to make demands." The moment balanced, on a knife's edge. Then, from the desert beyond town, came the thunder of approaching horses. Real territorial marshals, riding hard, dust clouds announcing their arrival. Thompson and his men were trapped, their corruption finally catching up to them. As the legitimate lawman took Thompson and his associates into custody, Clara felt Samuel sat beside her, years of tension finally releasing. She wrapped her arms around him, offering what comfort she could for wounds that were finally beginning to heal. "It's over," she whispered. "No," Samuel replied, pulling back to look into her eyes. "It's just beginning." 3 months later, Clara stood in her workshop, but she was no longer working alone. Samuel had proven surprisingly talented with clay, his musician's hands finding rhythm and purpose in the malleable earth. Together they created pieces that spoke of journeys and destinations, of roots and wings, of finding home in unexpected places. The town's initial suspicion had given way to grudging acceptance, then genuine respect. Samuel's skills as a peacekeeper had proven invaluable when disputed arose, and his quiet integrity had won over even the most stubborn skeptics. He'd been offered a permanent position as deputy sheriff, which he'd accepted with the understanding that his primary loyalty lay not with any badge, but with the community he'd chosen to protect. "Clara," Samuel said, looking up from the bowl. He was shaping, "There's something I want to show you." He retrieved a package from the shelf, carefully wrapped and tied with ribbon. Inside, Clara found a wooden flute, smaller than Samuel's, carved with delicate birds in flight. "I made it for you," he said softly, "so you can learn to speak the language music carries." Clara cradled the instrument, feeling the smooth warmth of wood beneath her fingers. "Will you teach me?" "If you'll teach me to fly," Samuel replied, gesturing to the ceramic birds that now filled their shared space, no longer symbols of escape, but of the journey they'd undertaken together. That evening, they sat on the porch of the small house they'd rented on the edge of town, close enough to be part of the community, far enough to claim privacy and perspective. The ceramic birds Samuel had bought from her were arranged on the railing, now joined by countless others, each one a milestone in their growing understanding of each other and themselves. Clara lifted the wooden flute to her lips, producing a tentative, breathy note. Samuel smiled encouragingly and began to play his own flute, creating a simple melody for her to follow. Their music wove together in the desert air, imperfect but hopeful, like everything worthwhile they'd built together. As stars emerged in the darkening sky, Clara realized she'd found what she'd been searching for without knowing, not escape from her life, but transformation of it. The ceramic birds on the railing no longer seemed to strain for distant horizons. Instead, they appeared content, watchful guardians of a love that had grown from mystery into truth, from longing into belonging. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked Samuel during a pause in their practice. "The traveling, the freedom to go anywhere?" Samuel set down his flute and took her hand. "I've learned the difference between freedom to run and freedom to choose. I choose this. Every day, I choose this." Clara leaned against his shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing, the warmth of his presence. Around them, the desert night sang its ancient song of endurance and renewal. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new choices, new chances, to build something beautiful from the raw materials of hope and determination. But tonight, surrounded by the evidence of their creativity and the promise of their future, Clara felt complete. She had learned to fly, not by leaving everything behind, but by finding someone brave enough to land beside her and call the place they touched down together home. The ceramic birds kept their silent vigil, witnesses to transformation, guardians of dreams that had become reality. And in the gentle music that filled the air, in the careful harmonies Clara and Samuel created together, the desert itself seemed to whisper approval of this love that had grown quietly, steadily, like water, finding its way to the sea.